It's no myth that weak drums will tank your chances of getting placements, streams, followers, beat sales, and any success as a producer. If you've ever wondered how top producers get their beats to hit so hard while also sounding clean and not sounding distorted, you found the right video. I want to go from start to finish and show you the production process behind making industry quality drum beats. I want to go over sample selection, the best place to find samples, drum sequencing, drum mixing, drum mastering, arranging, and I'm also going to show you how you can change up your drum beats depending on the style of beat you're producing. For example, you wouldn't want to use the spins 808 on a lo-fi beat, and a drill 808 sequence probably isn't the best for a pop song. So let me jump in and show you how it's done. So the first step to creating platinum quality drum beats is the sample selection. This is basically step 0, and it's a step that so many producers overlook, and they're left using weak samples, often samples that will have some kind of distortion, they won't be mixed properly, they'll have some long tail or long intro, so it messes up the timing. And pretty much before you've even started making the beat, if you have weak samples, it's going to really mess you up. We have tons of samples on WavGrind.com, but even if you want to go somewhere else, just make sure that you're getting high quality samples. I like to start a track by picking an 808. For example, I have this 808 here from the Producer Growth Kit. I'm just going to drag this into this project here. And one thing that you can do in FL Studio, and it's pretty similar in other software, is you tap on it, you go Control E, which opens up Edison. You click on this little pin here and you click detect pitch region. And what you want to see here is that it says C, which means that this 808 is tuned to C. If for any reason you have an 808 that's not tuned to C and it says F, for example, all you have to do is click on this little button here and right click on whatever note on the keyboard came up. So for example, if it came up with F, you want to right click here on F, and that sets the root note for this sample to F. So now when you go and play C, for example, on that 808, it will be in C instead of F. But this sample is tuned to C, as we like to do with all our samples, so we can just leave this where it is. One thing you also want to do to your 808s is turn off loop points if this is turned on, which you can do by opening up the sample, unticking the use loop points. And what this means is when I play this note here, this C note, it actually plays the whole sample. Whereas if I have loop points turned on, if I play the sample, it stops the second you let go. And the last thing you need to do to make sure that your 808 is ready is make sure that cut itself is turned on. Let's just say your 808 sequence has something like this, for example. When this second 808 comes in, it's going to cut the first 808 off so they don't clash. So if this is turned off, it's going to sound like this. And they're going to clash on top of each other. When picking claps, I think it's important to pick 2 claps. I like to pick one that's kind of short and sharp like this. And I also like to pick a wider kind of clap like this one here. And what I like doing is I like having this wider clap coming in later in the beat, which adds evolution. I'm going to grab a crash like this, and you don't have to create the crash sequence inside the channel rack. You could go inside the playlist editor and drag the crash in, but I like doing it inside the channel rack. Sometimes it's good to have some FX like this. When it comes to hi-hats, sometimes I like grabbing 2 hi-hats. So I get one that's pretty short and sweet like this one here and is very crisp. And then I like getting one which has a little bit more atmosphere to it, like this one for example. And I'll show you how they're going to come in and out when I'm actually making the beat. An open hi-hat is also very important for getting bounce in your track, and I often like using one that's kind of basic and short and sweet like this one. I'm going to grab a punchy kick like this one here, a perk like this, a snare like this, and a transition like this, which we can use later. Now before you even start sequencing the drums, it's important to know what BPM you're actually producing in. A lot of hip hop beats are between 130 and 160 BPM, but some different genres like dubstep often involve using 70 or 140 BPM. If the feel of your beat or the bounce or the rhythm just feels off, maybe try changing the BPM. And if you're making a beat for a specific artist, I'd have a look at what BPM they usually use in their tracks and use that BPM or a similar BPM for your track. I want to use 140 BPM, which I use for most of my beats. I always start with my hi-hats. I right click on my hi-hat and I click 2, and this creates a 2-step hi-hat pattern like this. I'm going to open it in the piano roll, which is going to turn it into the notes like this. I'm going to click Shift D, which is going to expand it into whatever length your magnet is set to. And I'm going to extend the last one out a little bit just so it fills a full bar. From there, I'm going to go and click Control B, which is going to duplicate it. And I duplicate it all the way up to 8 bars. There may be a faster or better way to do this, but this is how I've always seen producers do it. And when you get used to it, you can do it in about 5 seconds. Alternatively, you can use hi-hat MIDI, which just involves dragging that MIDI straight onto your hi-hat, and it's going to sound something like this. Now what's going to determine the whole feel of your hi-hats is what magnet you're using. For example, I'm on 1/4 beat and it sounds like this. But if you switch to 1/3 time, for example, it's going to sound like this. has a really kind of bouncy feel to it. And what you can do is you can swap between these magnets when you're creating your hi-hat sequence to add different bouncy kind of fills or hi-hat rolls. One very important shortcut to know is the slicer shortcut. Let's just say I wanted to add a hi-hat fill here. All I have to do is select the magnet that I want to use, like 1/6 beat for example. Click on it, make sure that the hi-hat note is selected, and do Control U, and that slices it up, which will sound something like this. I usually start by adding a little hi-hat roll at the start like this. Something like that. It's just a good place to start with the hi-hat. And one way that you can very easily add depth to your hi-hat is actually changing the hi-hat pitch. There's a meme going around about people using hi-hat chords, and this isn't even that far off it. All you have to do is go and add a note on C4 for example, and it's going to sound something like this. I think it's very important for making your hi-hats not sound robotic. I think the less you can make it sound like a computer-generated hi-hat sequence, the better. And another way you can do that is messing with the velocity. You'll notice that I turned down the velocity on some of these lower hi-hats. And one other thing you can do is change the pan, which basically changes which side of the headphones it's going to play on. So let's just say we select this fill here. What we could do is something like this. We just drag the mouse, and it's pretty much going to make it go from one ear to the other, and it's going to sound like this. You can also go into hi-hat fills like the start here. Whichever ones you select are the ones that you're going to change. So if you don't want to change the pan of like this hi-hat for example, just grab the top ones and you can go and do something like this to make it go left and right. You can also go and do something completely random with the velocity by going and doing some kind of wave like this with the mouse. And what that does is going to change the velocity up and down as the hi-hats are going along. So I finished with this hi-hat sequence here. And following on with the hi-hats, the next thing we can do is add an open hi-hat. You can place an open hi-hat here, which kind of has more of a simple in-time feel, or if you want to add some bounce to your track, you can place it in a position like here, which is going to lead in really nicely to the snare. So this is the first position, and this is the second. I like to alternate them as the beat is going along. Next step is adding the snares and the claps. So we have the crisp clap like this. And we also have the wider one I dragged in that sounds like this. I like to stagger them so that the wider one comes in every second clap, and that's going to sound something like this. I'm going to add a crash to the start like this. And the tail is a little bit long, so I'm going to drag the out, and that's going to crop down the tail and make it shorter. I like using the snares to add snare fills. So for example, you could add a snare at the start to add a bouncy kind of fill like this. I added a pan to this snare roll at the end so it sounds bouncy like this. I added this quiet hi-hat in the background like this. The next very important step is the kick. I actually like recording the kick. You can do it on your keyboard by clicking the comma button, because that is C5, or you can use a MIDI keyboard like this here. So I'm going to click record and just record a kick. Thankfully, we can quantize it by clicking Control Q, and that's going to snap it to the nearest note. And one thing that took me forever to notice in really good beats is that the volume of the kick actually changes throughout the song. So some of the first notes here are really punchy, but the follow-up kicks tend to be a bit quieter, and it just reduces the fatigue of having this punchy kick coming in so many times. I'm gonna then copy the kick and paste it on the 808. And if you don't want the velocity to follow what the kick did, all you have to do is hold down the Alt key and just click and drag, and it's gonna snap all of the 808 volumes up to the kind of default velocity. So if we were making this beat on top of a melody, you want these notes to follow the root notes of the melody. But since we're making the beat on its own, I'm just gonna keep the 808 sequence in C and have it slide up to G5. But if I was to have a melody that I'm following, all I would have to do is just shift it up or down based on whatever key the melody is in. So I added this very bouncy effect here. What I did is I grabbed a note and made the velocity 0. So what it does is it cuts off this 808 as soon as it hits this note here. Then a kick comes in and then the 808 comes back in and it sounds like this. I'm going to do a similar thing here where the 808 doesn't come in until the last note in this kick fill. One thing that we can add in that will really help us later is if you're going to end on a higher note like a G5, I'm going to add this incredibly quiet note down here at C, and I'm going to mute it. And pretty much what this does, it's going to cut out the end of the note like this. I'm going to drag in this transition here like this. At this point, we have a good drum beat. I'm going to go and click and then click again, which is going to select all of the layers. I'm going to go into the mixer. I'm going to click on Insert 1 and I'm going to click Control Shift L. That adds all of the layers to the mixer track. And now this is one of the most important parts, which is actually mixing it. It's important to make sure that the beat and the melody fit together perfectly. And to show you how to do that, I'm just going to drag and drop this melody from the Producer Growth Kit. And it also comes with the MIDI. So I'm going to drag the MIDI in, make sure that ghost notes are turned on, make sure the 808 actually follows the melody. The root note of the melody changes from an A to an F, and I decided to follow it with the 808, which really makes it match the melody, and that sounds something like this. Sometimes it can help to raise the octave of the 808 when you're making it, just to make sure that it sounds good, because it's easier to actually hear how it fits into the melody. I've gone and used an EQ to trim off some of the low end on these melodies, just to make sure that it doesn't clash with the 808. I'm also going to drag this merge knob all the way up, which makes the beat play in mono, which can make it a little bit easier to listen to the beat and understand what level everything is at. Just make sure to turn it off when you finish mixing the track. I'm going to add a little bit of distortion to the 808 just to make it hit a little bit harder. So if you have a look at this level here, this shows you the final volume of the beat, and it's hitting at this -3 level here, which is where I want it. The last thing I'm going to do is go into the master and use some kind of maximizer or soft clipper to increase the finished volume of the track. I want to show you a couple different examples just in case you don't want to use these software or if you don't have FL Studio. So I'm going to start with using Ozone 9. I'm going to go into the maximizer. I'm going to reduce the character down to 1, which reduces the attack and release time of the maximizer. And as I lower the threshold, it actually increases the finished volume of the track. You can also use something like Fruity Soft Clipper, which is basically as easy as just going in and dragging up the post. You can also use a software like Maximus. You go in and turn on solo, you go and select bands here, and you can change what Maximus considers to be a low frequency, a mid frequency, and a high frequency. You can go and tweak these knobs here. So essentially you want to keep your lows to the very low end of the melody, the bass and the kick. You want your mids to be a little bit of the hi-hat, the snares and the melodies. And the high is basically just the top end of the hi-hats and the snares. If you want your kick and your bass to hit harder, you can go and change this here, which is going to increase the volume of the kick and the 808. If you feel like it's a bit too punchy and you want it to be softer, you can do the opposite and drag it down, which will make it quieter. You can also go and change the pre-gain here. So if you want the 808s to be unbelievably loud, you can turn that up. Or if you want to quiet them down, you can just release it. If you're planning on sending this beat out for placements, one of the important things to do is make sure that the engineer has the ability to download the stems. So basically when you're exporting the beat, all you need to do is make sure to tick the split mixer track section. So that means the engineer can go in and they can change the levels however you want. So that's how you can make hit-ready drum beats. Lots of people have lots of different ideas and very complicated ways of mixing drum sequences. But if you actually look at top producers make beats and listen to them talk about it in podcasts, so many of them will admit all they do is go and add a soft clipper to their beat, turn the post up and just leave it at that. The vast majority of songs released by big artists and by labels, they'll have an engineer go and remix all of the layers anyways, so I wouldn't waste too much time going past this and trying to tweak the littlest things and change the levels a little bit, because it's very likely that the engineer is going to go in and change all of these anyways. I hope you learned a lot from this. If you want the samples I used in this beat, go and click the link in the description to get the producer growth kit, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.